There we go. All right. Okay. So those of you who went to synagogue on Tuesday, all right, today's Wednesday. The holidays have been going on. It's hard to figure out what day of the week it is. Fortunately, at the end of the service, you usually have the psalm for the day, so that way when you walk out of synagogue, you know what day of the week it was. But anyway, we completed the cycle. And this Shabbat, we renew the cycle of reading the Torah. Right? We do know that there were really two different traditions that existed at one point in time. One was, according to some, was the tradition of the land of Israel, and the other was that of Babylonia. And the Babylonian tradition became the standard. And the standard is that we take the 5 books of Moses, and it's divided up into what we parshiot sections. There are a few extra because some years there are extra Shabbatot in the calendar, some years there are fewer. Sometimes they're doubled up, sometimes they're separated. So that what happens is this coming Shabbat, we read the first opening chapters of Bereishit, of Genesis. Where we end this Shabbat, we begin next Shabbat. Okay, so where we end one Saturday, we take up the next Saturday. Actually, we already Saturday afternoon, Shabbat afternoon, we read the first portion of the weekly portion that's coming up, and Mondays and Thursday mornings as well. Okay, so this week we will open up with Bereishit. And Bereishit, in many ways, is one of the most important chapters of the Bible, and for us moderns, one of the most difficult. It's most important because it gives us a basic premise. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. At the beginning, or when the beginning was about, not in the beginning, that's not really a correct translation, God created heaven and earth. And even that's not clear. So first of all, the opening word is problematic. Fascinating. The first word of the Bible is a problem. Bereshit should be in the beginning of something, but there's no something to follow. Right? It doesn't say in the beginning of creating. That would make sense, but that's not what the Torah says. It says, so there are many attempts to resolve it. We're not going to do that here, but the point being, and why it's the most important book in the Torah, in a sense, is it sets the premise that God is the creator of the universe. However the universe came into being, however you want to look at it, the Jewish ideal is to believe that there is a creative entity, a creative force that brought everything into being. And while science can offer various opinions on how it took place, it cannot answer a why. And we really don't have a why in the Bible either. But we have a premise that there is a creator. God created. Now, the 7-day cycle that's listed, even the early rabbis had many questions about it as being, don't think of it as being giving us the order of creation. Rashi, the medieval commentator in the 11th century, the Common Era, says it's not meant to tell us the order of creation. Already recognizing that without the scientific issues. I don't deny that Rashi probably believed the world was 5,000 some hundred years old. On his day, it was about 1,000 years younger, be that as it may. And he may have believed in the earth being the center of the universe and all of those other kinds of things. And the Bible can very clearly be read that way. It doesn't have to be, but it can, and most likely the people around it at that time saw it in that manner. But its message is not so much, it's not so much the how of creation, but the fact of creation. The rabbis talk about yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. in Latin, ex nihilo. And really today, the Big Bang Theory, not the TV show, right, essentially is the same thing. There's an anomaly. And then something happens, they don't know why or how or what, and you have the universe come into being. Now, it's fascinating that this idea of an expanding universe from a minuscule, even less than minuscule point, fits very well in with mystical Jewish concepts. Okay, but in any case, the story is that God is the creator. It's the idea that there is a source of creation and there's an individual, a single source of creation. That's very important when you compare it with the various mythologies that existed side by side with the biblical religion. You know, most of the mythologies have some kind of chaos. The gods arise from that chaos, and then creation goes about from then on. And sometimes in order to do creation, gods kill other gods and build the world from the bodies of these other gods. Now, what's important in that formula is it means that the gods are not ultimate. If there is something that gives rise to the divine, then the divine cannot be the ultimate reality, because there's something that gives rise to them. By asserting that there is a creator, we can now identify, at least on a theological level, that since there's a creator, the creator can be identical with the moral and truth of the universe. Again, when you look at all the pagan mythologies, when cities go to war, the famous, let's take the Iliad of Homer. There are gods on both sides of the war, right? They're fighting with each other. When a city conquers another city, it's as if their god bested that other city's god. So there cannot be a divine split because there's only one divine. It's important to note in the language of the Torah, the first verse, which I'm spending some time on, Bereishit bara Elohim. Now the word bara grammatically means a single creator. In Hebrew, every word has gender and number. Right? So the gender is masculine, but that's irrelevant to our discussion. But the number is a single source. Right? Elohim, the word that we translate as God, is actually a plural construct. It can mean God, and when we talk about God, the Jewish God, we say Elohim, but we can also speak of pagan gods using the same term, Elohim. I think the best way of understanding it is if most pagan gods are, I think the word is apotheosis, I'm not sure, I'm trying to find a fancy word, but most gods really are elements of the world. There's a storm god, there's a god of the sea, the god for the air, right? All the gods are really the elements, the forces of the world around. So if Elohim, the creator, is only one, and whenever we see Elohim referring to God with capital G, the verb is singular, not plural. So there's one, all those forces, all of those elements that many people saw as being epitomized through different gods are all to be found in the one God. So chapter 1 through the first 4 verses of chapter 2 is the creation story. Day 1, God does this. Day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. And on the 7th day, as we talked about last week, he rests. Whatever that means for God. And now what happens is, which causes a quandary to people, is that in chapter 2, chapter 1 says God creates everything, right? Let there be light, let there be a firmament in the sky, let there be dry land, let there be fish, let there be fowl, let there be land animals, let there be vegetation. And the last thing he creates is the human beings. Zachar nekeva barotam, male and female, he created them. Chapter 2, all of a sudden it seems that it's almost like it's a totally different version of creation. The world had not yet sprouted vegetation because God had not yet caused the rains to fall. And it goes through that. The rabbis of old, recognizing the problem, suggested that the first account of creation is the generalization of it. And what follows after that are the particular details. So that when it comes to the creation of man, first God makes man, Adam, from the earth, breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and then creates all the animals, and then says, it's not good for man to be alone. He needs somebody along with him, a helpmate, Ezer Kenegdo. And then he brings all the animals in front of Adam, and he doesn't really seem to take a desire for any of them, thank God. So finally, God puts him to sleep and takes from his flesh and creates the first woman. Right? Now, again, the rabbis do not believe anything being contradictory in the Bible. Okay? So they will do everything they can to smooth out any problem areas. Like modern Bible critics assume there are 2 stories of creation that got put together. Okay, we'll talk more about that when we talk about the Bible in general. The rabbis couldn't, that's just not it. It's one divine document, so we can't contradict. So he said the first human being, because it says Zachar nekeva barotam, male and female created them, was that the first human being was both male and female in one body. And so what God does is he separates the male and female parts, creating man and woman. That's why a man leaves his father and his mother, and he clings to his wife, almost in a very physical metaphor. Right? Because in the union of the male and the female, the original creation comes back into being. So now, what then follows in Genesis is the sin of Adam and Eve. In Christian theology, the first sin, right? And that we talked about that, right? Didn't we discuss? We didn't discuss. Okay. For the Bible says God tells Adam and he informs Eve, Chava, that there's one fruit in the middle of the garden they're not supposed to eat. And along comes the serpent and convinces Chava, Eve, to eat it. She gives it to Adam. Adam eats it. And all of a sudden they realize they're naked. They get embarrassed by it. Before then, they weren't embarrassed by that. Then God says, what's going on? And Adam says, wasn't me. It was her. It was her. It's her fault. Isn't there a song about that? I don't know. There is. I'm sure there is. And as some wise lady put it on when I was listening to her, okay, and they'll all get punished. Now, if there is a line in Jewish tradition that suggests that there was some kind of carrying on of almost an odor of evil as a result of the sin. But in general, most Jewish traditions follow that. Except the idea that each individual is responsible for themselves and for their life and our choices, so therefore we are born innocent. What becomes an important element of Christian theology is the idea of original sin. Adam and Eve, as a result of their sin, every human being who is born in a state of sin. And they take from Jewish tradition, from the Bible, the idea of sacrifices, necessary to remove and say the only way you can do that is through the.
You start off in the negative, and you have to constantly prove yourself to be innocent. It's a fantastic sign.
No, I don't know. It, you know,
Isn't it a lot easier than trying to stay good?
Well, you still have to be good. Well,
yeah, we still have to be good.
well, then you start ranking. I'm not.
Guilty rather than guilty until proven innocent. In the French courts, that's how it works.
Yeah, in our courts, it's hopefully it's innocent until proven guilty.
Right. So it's a similar kind of thing. Don't you think it was a great way of establishing and broadening religion? Yeah.
Well, you have to look and see the history of the rise of Christianity and what it was doing and how it first piggybacked off of Judaism, very clearly piggybacked off of Judaism, and then went its own direction. There were many elements in early Christianity they took over from pagans. The idea of the divine son of a god is a very pagan idea. The idea that a god impregnates a human woman is a very pagan idea.
I'm not talking whether it's pagan or not.
No. I'm saying that's no. I'm just saying. Well, but by doing that, they made it more acceptable to what was around them. Mm-hmm. Their biggest kunst, the biggest kunst of Christianity in the early days was eliminating the responsibility to fulfill mitzvot. You didn't have to keep kosher. You didn't have to be circumcised. That was in, but we know that there were a lot of Romans, aristocracy, and there's a paper, I have to read it yet, especially aristocratic women who were very interested in Judaism in those early years. And the men hesitated for one very simple reason, the circumcision. But once you don't need to be circumcised to be part of the covenant, makes life a lot easier. So there are lots of things that the Christians came up with to create their cell management, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I think that those are the things that we have to see. But what's tied into that then becomes an image of the human being, and that's what the point I want to make. Are human beings innocent? And they make their own way through life, and what they do in this world determines their fate vis-a-vis God? Or are human beings sinful creatures, born in sin, cannot make it to God without the Savior? And therefore, you know, and how that gets worked out throughout the centuries is not for us tonight. Right? But so that's a big difference, an important difference between Judaism and Christianity and the way it went. So that even in Jewish tradition, we might find some of this element of original sin, kind of, a little bit. It gets shunted aside, but taken up with Christianity. Now, Genesis as a whole is interested in the origins of life and civilization and everything. So we have stories, the first murder, two brothers, one kills the other. What else is new? Anybody who has a sibling knows that there's times you want to really give it to them, punch them out. Yeah, right? And it has stories about all kinds of things. One element that we also have to take note of, and I'm going to finish with this, is that the biblical account talks about long lives, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, nearly 1,000 years. And that was a very popular concept in the ancient world. In the Babylonian mythology, we're talking about tens of thousands of years for people living, or at least certain elements. So even there, so again, the rabbis, many of them suggest it was only these righteous individuals, they got to live that long because they were closer to the original creation, because they were closer to the original creation, they were closer to the perfect, what should be, and as time went by, that gets watered down or something until the lifespan is 120 if you're lucky, right? And when you go past the early, the Genesis stories, Moses lives to be 120, but most of the figures that read after that, they live normal, what we consider to be normal lifespans. Book of Psalms speaks of 70 of 80 have granted the strength. We haven't changed much, really, just the aggregate, the average. We don't really live longer than our ancestors did, but more of us live longer than our ancestors did. That's the real difference. Okay? So Genesis begins with creation. It begins with the story of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, their children, then all of humanity, until we get to the end of Parashat Bereishit, where everybody's doing wrong, and God's talking about starting all over again, and he works with Noah, and that's next week's portion. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the test that I gave everybody to do. Actually, I meant to give you a little bit more, but I was in a rush getting it out because of the holidays. What?
I was wondering why there was 16, 17, 19. I'm going, did I print it all off properly or not?
Yeah, no. I wasn't going to give you much more there, but I also have some matchings, but I didn't do matchings because the example I had right offhand was on Shabbat. We hadn't done everything on there. Okay, so let's take a look, everybody. And like I said, I'm not interested in what you did. You're right. Okay. Number one, Jews are. The correct answer is C. Okay, they're both an ethnic group and a religious group. I want to hammer that into you. I'll hammer it and hammer it and hammer it. There's a culture, there's a religion, and there's an ethnicity. Both of those are elements there. The impossible is when you convert to Judaism, you become an ethnic Jew. Okay, no matter what you look like. Okay, you walk down the street in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, and you'll see every kind of face and every kind of coloration and what we call races being represented amongst the Jews that are in Israel. And here too, for that matter. All right. Torah really means D, all of these things. Okay. Number three, the Jewish calendar is
C. I thought that Torah was divine law.
But it's more than that. That the word itself is teaching. Hora is to teach. You know, what's the Hebrew word for a teacher? It's the same word from the same source. So it means teaching. It can be identified with the 5 books of Moses. It can be identified with the entire Bible, Tanakh. It's identified with all of Jewish learning and tradition. So it's all of these things. When we read the stories of Adam or read the stories of Abraham, we're not reading law. We're learning other things, other ideas that are being expressed, but not law.
Maybe not divine law, but divine insight.
Well, that's nice. I'll accept that as a definition. Right? But I think it's not sufficient. I think it's more expansive than that. But all right. Okay. So number 3, we say it's a solar lunar calendar. Number C, because we adjust the the lunar calendar to meet the solar conditions. I was just reading introduction. Some fellow wanted to study, and so we read Ibn Ezra's introduction to his commentary in the Torah. And he cites the Karaites for not understanding the Torah properly because they think the sun too. the Chodesh Aviv, the month of the holiday of Passover, lunar calendar that would not have. How many days in a Jewish month? The answer is 29 or 30, so I think that was D.
This one, how many days in Rosh Hashanah?
Oh, how many days is Rosh Chodesh? D, 1 or 2. Okay. If a month is 30 days long, yeah. Okay. Were you here when we did the calendar? No. Okay. All right. The lunar calendar, the lunar month is essentially approximately 29 days plus.
Sorry, no, I meant the why.
Well, I'm saying, originally, people would go out, and if they saw the new moon, so they would go out, let's say, for argument's sake, today was the 29th of the month. This morning was, let's say for argument's sake. So tonight, people go out to look to see if they see the new moon. If they see the new moon, they go to the Beit Din, the court in Jerusalem the next day, or wherever the court was at that period of history, and say, we saw the new moon. The rabbis question them, say, you're right. Today, therefore, is the first day of the next month. But if they didn't see the new moon, they would say, today is the 30th day of the previous month. So whenever we celebrate Rosh Chodesh, when a month is 30 days long, the last day of the month is the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and the first day of the month is the second day of Rosh Chodesh. And normally we have a 30-day month followed by a 29-day month. If it's a 29-day month, Rosh Chodesh is only going to be 1 day for the next month. Okay. That's part of the reason for doing this too, so you understand. All right. We said, okay, 39, the Jewish day begins at sunset.
No, how many days are there in a Jewish month?
Oh, we just said, number 5, we just said that, 29 or 30. So the correct answer should be D. Even I sometimes get confused on my questions. And I repeat my mistakes because I'm lazy and don't rewrite a new test every year. 6, the Jewish day begins at D, sunset. 7, Shabbat candles should be lit no later than C, 18 minutes before sunset. You will find some calendars and communities that use 20 minutes. And in Israel, it's a half an hour. Okay. But here the standard is 18 minutes.
I wonder about the kookiness in Jerusalem. They always seem to have a different time for like that.
It's just that not just Jerusalem, but in many places, it's a stringency. You know, the point is Shabbat,
So it isn't 18 minutes.
Shabbat itself actually begins exactly at sunset.
What's sunset? What is sunset?
Now that's another disagreement. Depends on you, Rabbeinu Tam or Rosh. It is either when the sun goes completely below the horizon, or it's when the light that's in the east, in the west, disappears completely. And there's light in the west and the east. And believe me, that's a whole thing you don't want to get into. So that's why some people say the stars come out 42 minutes after sunset, and some say the stars come out 72 minutes after sunset. I like the 42 minutes. And go by that. Okay, but if you want 72 minutes, that's fine. You can follow Rabbeinu Tam. My oldest son does that. All right. Where were we? Number 8. The second night of Yom Tov falls on a weekday. We light the candles no earlier than C, 42 minutes after sunset. Second night of Yom Tov, we don't light the candles until the day is done.
But there's no question. There's
There's
no answer.
no answer.
Yeah.
C.
Sorry, why would it not be B then?
C.
Sunset.
So the
All right.
the number 9 is C also, 42 minutes after.
Yeah, 42 minutes after sunset.
That if it's
No, we're doing the idea that for sure the next day begins when the stars come out. And we have that in-between period, I'm not going to go into right now, all right? The in-between period. So Shabbat is not over until 42 minutes after sunset. A holiday is not over until 42 minutes after sunset. The second day of the holiday becomes a question because it's not, biblically, it's not a holiday. It was added on because of confusion of the calendar, being certain when the calendar was established, when the months were established. So therefore, the tradition is on the second day of Yom Tov, when it falls during the weekdays, you don't light candles, you don't end the first day until 42 minutes after sunset. However, question number 9, we can't light candles after sunset if it's Shabbat. So it's 18 minutes before. Okay, so those are 2 things you have to have in mind. Understand that.
So when it's Shabbat, it's always 18 minutes. before.
Always before.
And then on Sunday, it's always when the stars come out.
Correct.
In the context of a conservative conversion, is this minutiae something that focus on, or just be aware on 17 minutes?
Well, no.
39
Look,
minutes? It
yeah.
does sound like minutiae.
You can quibble over the 18 minutes if you want, but that's the standard that's found in calendars.
Yeah,
It's not a minute. That's not a minute. That's what's standard.
Open up your local calendar and don't think about it.
No, what happens if you're in a place where you don't have a calendar on the head end? You're
There
off,
aren't Jews there, doesn't matter.
but if you're there, there's a Jew there. And a Jew has to observe Shabbat.
There you go.
But if you are there,
But again, are we, as a conservative
yes,
conversion,
yes, yes,
this is important for us to know amongst many, many other details.
Ye-
This is what we need to
yes,
know.
yes.
The
You have to
number of
understand,
minutes
you have to
before,
under,
after, and during Friday, Thursday, Saturday.
yeah, because how do you know what you're doing?
Does it matter for conservative Jews?
Yes.
I see.
What's the definition of conservative Jew?
It ain't Orthodox Judaism, it isn't Reform.
That's not a definition. That's a negation.
What is the definition?
Conservative Judaism is Judaism which tries to follow Jewish law and make those necessary adjustments that with the basic premises of Judaism as it's been practiced. That's my understanding. There may be more liberal, more interpretations perhaps, but if you go to any conservative rabbi in town and you ask them what time do we light candles on Friday night, they will tell you 18 minutes before sunset.
I'm actually not disputing that, I'm sure they would say it. I'm just wondering for the context of this class, and those of us who are converting to conservative Judaism. is this
That's the
something we
practice
should
of
fill up our minds with, rather than something else. If this is the most important thing, then we're nailing it.
It's
If it
not
ain't
the mo-
most important
I don't know if,
thing,
what do you mean by the most? If I emphasize something I think it's important, then you need to
Okay.
know it.
There you go.
I have a question.
Yes,
I get you.
On the first night of Yom
Yeah,
Tov,
when
when
do
do
you
you
light
light? the
it's like
candles?
Shabbos.
So
First night of Yom
it's
Tov is like
always
Shabbos,
18 minutes.
18 minutes.
So only the second night. it's-
Only the second night because you have that problem.
Yeah. of
And if
the
it's
day
Shabbat.
separation.
And it is similarly, if a Yontiv theoretically can begin on Saturday night, for example, Pesach occasionally begins Saturday night. You can't light candles for the first night of Pesach because it's Saturday night. You can't light until 18 minutes. All right, there are some approaches that have a little bit earlier. All right?
We put it that way. When you light it after.
You have to, all right, candles on the Shabbat, okay? That's the most important element, whether it's 18 minutes, 20 minutes, 40, all right? That's the most important thing to remember. You do not light candles on Shabbat itself. You do not light candles to start with on Yontiv itself. You also have to light candles before Yontiv begins.
But that's what I mean, so can you do it after?
Well, Yom Tov,
Saturday.
If it's on a Saturday.
all right, let's theoretically, it might be possible to light candles a little bit later on Yom Tov, but we don't do that. Okay, for like the second night of Yom Tov, Okay? You're supposed to transfer the flame. You're not supposed to light a match to light the candles. You're supposed to transfer from a flame that's already there. All right? Because you're not supposed to create a flame anew. Right? So if you were to light candles on Yom Tov after the sunset on the first day of Yom Tov, you might be tempted to light it with a match because that's what you always do. Okay, so therefore, one should not light candles on Yom Tov itself. It's either before Yom Tov begins or the second night is after the first day is finished. Okay? That's the most important concept there. Day, right? All right. So we got the second night of Yom Tov taken care of. Yeah. No, second night of Yom Tov that falls on a Friday, 18 minutes before sunset. Okay. On Rosh Hashanah, we dip bread in honey, or we put honey on the bread, whichever way you handle it at your table. Which of the following is not forbidden on Yom Kippur? Singing. Leather shoes are not permitted.
It's a trick question. Let's read it.
Well, it makes
What's
it,
permitted or what's not permitted?
yeah, well, I want you to think.
Yeah.
If Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, we do not blow the shofar, B. However, but if you go to Reform temples, if they only observe one day, you'll see they do blow the shofar on the first day. 13, if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, we fast. We are allowed to cook on Yom Tov, true or false? True. Okay.
No.
You missed
What, this one, about the,
Oh, above the ark in the synagogue is what?
Ceiling.
near Talmud.
Near Talmud.
Their Tamid, eternal light.
What was?
What was 15?
Yeah, true.
Are we allowed to cook it? What-
Yeah, allowed to cook on Yom Tov. That's the major difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov.
Isn't that though if you have the fire?
Yeah, there are
Okay,
rules,
all
yeah,
right,
but
okay,
you are
so
allowed to
you
cook.
are allowed to cook. All right, that was the definition. Okay.
Their Tamid or eternal light.
What was 11? 11 was. C. Yeah, that's what I
You see, no, 11 is singing. C, yeah, C.
Okay.
11 is C. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't see. it.
Rabbi,
Yes,
can you explain which holidays are part of Yom Tov? Because when we were researching it, like, there was.
okay, all right.
Yeah. good point.
All right, all right. We understand Shabbat, right? That's the 25 hours. Okay. Rosh Hashanah, 2 days. Yom Kippur, 1 day. Now, Yom Tov, technically, and that, and that's a technical detail. It depends on what you're looking at, trying to find it. So you have to be, be aware of that. Really applies to the 3 festivals. Sukkot, first 2 days of Sukkot outside of Israel are full Yom Tov. All right? Intermediate days are sometimes referred to as Chol HaMoed, the weekdays of the holiday. And then Sukkot, the last 2 days, it technically is a separate holiday, Shmini Atzeret, the second day, Shmini Atzeret. There are different opinions on how much you're allowed to work in the intermediate days. Talk to your rabbi, okay? Passover, first 2 days, last 2 days are full holidays. Intermediate days is Chol Moed, and finally Shavuot, 2 days. Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday. Purim technically is, but it's not biblical, not in the Torah. So we have the three pilgrimage festivals. We have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are the biblical holidays. Okay. All right, lest I forget, and Alex, I'll have to mail it to you or we'll arrange for you to pick this up. Maybe I'll send you some copies. We're supposed to start the Hebrew next week. Now, I sent out the notice about the Hebrew class that's available through the shul here. You want to do one, both, but we will go over Hebrew in class. These are for you. They don't cost you anything, one per couple, if that's what you are. All right, one for the two of you. This you don't have to pay for. Let's see, make sure everybody's got one.
Oh, Rabbi, and we'll be there November 9th, actually.
November 9th, okay.
Yeah.
Remember having these there. Either I'll mail it to you or I will send you some offsets of the first few pages.
Okay, fantastic. I actually took an intro to Hebrew class 8 weeks before this.
Oh, okay, maybe then
Yeah.
I'll let you teach it.
Please no.
All right, we're not going to start this tonight. You can take a look at it.
So
It's-
when are we starting?
We will start next week is when we're scheduled, right? October 26th. We will spend most of the night on Hebrew next week. Okay. Now, this is, there are different books that are out there in the world. This is what's available right now. It's not bad. It's put out by the Reform Movement, which doesn't make anything bad about it. It is designed around teaching you how to read a blessing, a bracha. So that gives you some kind of way of relating to what you're doing. One of the problems about learning Hebrew or learning any language that you don't speak is you don't have a way of relating to it. If I want in reading versus reading, right? If I say a cat and you're learning how to read English and you know what a cat is, all right, CAT, you can relate to it. But chatul is not going to help you very much. That's a cat in Hebrew. But you know, to read the word chatul and recognize that that's a cat, that you can't unless you know Hebrew. If you know Hebrew, then yeah, learning to read Hebrew is a lot easier. Just like learning to read English is easier if you speak English. Right? So they chose this method. There was a book we used to use that's not available right now. It's called Shalom Aleichem, and it uses the Shalom Aleichem that we're going to talk about later tonight as the basic format. And so what this will do, and I'll go over again more next time, it has the words you're working on, the letter you're working on, and practice word with it. And it's all phonetic. Right? We will teach you a few basic words as we go along, but this is not meant to teach you how to understand Hebrew other than some of the basic words that we will use. We just don't have the time to do that. You're interested in doing that? Be my guest, please do so, but you have to just find another place, okay? So please bring this with you every week. This is your text. You can do with it as you please. Just remember to bring it. Write your name, write notes. By the way, one other thing about Jewish books, you're allowed to write in Jewish books. The great commentaries all came about because somebody wrote notes on the side of the page. Okay? And sometimes they made a mistake and they thought it belonged in the text. And that's how some things got into the Talmud that didn't belong there. Okay, Rashi's comment on the side thing. All right. Okay. All right, last week we talked about some of the technical observance with Shabbat, really the various laws of observance. Tonight we want to spend some time on how we make Shabbat. Okay. Now, as I've alluded to, we really start preparing for Shabbat in advance. Since it's a special day and you can't cook on Shabbat, if you're going to have meals, you have to have your food you're going to eat on Shabbat prepared before Shabbat. Ideally, you know, Friday is house cleaning day or whatever it may be, however you work it out. Maybe it's Thursday night, you're both working, you know, whatever. Okay. My job is the mopping and the vacuuming and laundry on Sunday. Anyway. So now, before Shabbat begins, ideally, you have the table set, everything that's ready for your meal, your best china, whatever you've got, your best paper plates. the fancy plastic, whatever you use. The tradition is that a minimum of 2 candles are lit on Friday night. Some have a tradition of lighting a candle for each person in the household. So since there's 2 candles, you start with normally with 2 candles. Then what we've done and my kids have done is add a candle for each child that comes into our life. Okay, so my wife lights 5 candles every Friday night. Okay. Some use the wax candles, some use oil candles. There are all kinds of things out there, whatever works for you. Okay, that has to be set up and ready before Shabbat. So now, once the time comes to light the candles, which on Shabbat evening, Erev Shabbat is 18 minutes. Thank you. Now, there's a problem that we already confront. When you do a mitzvah, normally we say the blessing and then we perform the act. Right? For example, the lulav. We had lulav and etrog this last week. Before you pick up the lulav and etrog and getting it to shake it, you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Praise you, Lord God, King of Universe, has commanded us. It sanctifies His commands, commanded us on the tilat lulav, on taking the lulav, and then you perform the action. But since you cannot light candles on Shabbat, and once you light the candles, you're accepting upon yourself that it is Shabbat. If you said the blessing, all right, but if you said the blessing is what really recognizes it's Shabbat. So, all right. So if you said the blessing, you can't light the candles because you already accepted upon yourself that it's Shabbat. So the Jewish tradition for Ashkenazic Jews is that we light the candles first, cover our eyes, recite the blessing, and there may be hand gestures of different customs that people have. Then you move your hands away, the lights are available, you see the candles, and so it's as if they're new to you at that moment. The original idea was to have light in the house.
Yeah, but it's on
No, if, for example, my wife is home, guess who lights the candles? I do. Okay. Elena didn't make it, and Maya's not here. And I said, Joseph is here. Is he? Yeah. Keep pointing to, I got you. Oh no, who is I'm missing? Oh, Nadia's not here. Okay. Right. All right. So that is the custom. The lighting of, there is a kind of division of labor often in Jewish homes. Traditionally, there were men's things and there were women's things. So for example, you don't have to remember this, but for example, there's a lot of authorities that say if a man has to light candles, he can light the candles early and say the blessing and then go to the synagogue and even drive to the synagogue because he's going to accept the Shabbat when he says the prayers of Friday night. And so therefore he hasn't really accepted the Shabbat. But the woman who didn't necessarily go to daven, to pray, what have you, that for her was acceptance of Shabbat. We live in a different age in many ways. Say, my daughters-in-law and daughter all daven, all pray on Friday night. So they're going to say the prayer service anyway. So some of these things come from an era when women didn't necessarily say the prayers, what have you. However, one aspect to this that is important to know is that the ideal always was to start Shabbat right before sunset, say the evening prayers after sunset, again, even ideally after the stars come out to say the evening prayers. And that's fine. And in Israel, where the movement of the sun isn't so drastic, from in summertime and wintertime, it's not such a big difference. Here, not only we have daylight savings time, we live further north. Even without daylight savings time, there's a big gap in time from the winter and summer. The rabbis have a whole discussion as to when is the proper time to recite the evening service, and when is the proper time to recite the Shema that is part of the evening service. And I'm just going to do it real quickly now. When we talk about Talmud, I'll show you in the text. Theoretically, you can start Shabbat 1.25 hours before Shabbat, before sunset. And that's those hours are based upon the time between sunrise and sunset. 1.25. So in the summer, most synagogues in North America have an earlier service before some may have two services. They would have what they call the Plag HaMincha service, which is approximately 1.25 hours before sunset, 1.5 hours actually, more like in the middle of the summer. And then another service maybe right by sunset. Okay, so be aware of that you can do it. There is some discussion in conservative circles where different rabbis have approved even saying the evening service even earlier than that. That's not my tradition to follow, but that is done in some conservative synagogues. There was a response written about that a few years ago in which he defended saying it early. All right? So some synagogues here in town aren't conservative synagogues aren't exactly right on don't hit the nail exactly on the head when it comes to earliest times of saying it during the summer. They might say it earlier than I personally would be comfortable with. Okay, so again, your synagogue, your rabbi, you talk to them about that practice. Now the Friday night service that we have developed in two stages. One was the basic evening service. We've talked about the evening services before. We'll go more into the Siddur, look at it again. But it's blessings that, first of all, it's a call to prayer, the Baruch Hu. It's blessings before the Shema. It's the recitation of the Shema, blessings after the Shema, and then the silent prayer. Very early on was added to recite the psalm that is known as the Sabbath psalm. It's Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, the psalm for the Sabbath day, which has nothing to do with the Sabbath, but anyway, it's called the psalm for the Sabbath day. Okay. The mystics in Tzfat in the 16th century introduced what became known as Kabbalat Shabbat, the welcoming of the Sabbath. It's a recitation of a hymn for a psalm for each day of the week, as well as a special hymn which is called Lecha Dodi, come my beloved, let us greet the bride, the Sabbath queen, usually sung, and it was composed by Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz. And we know he's composed it because he used the first letter of his name for each opening stanza. So the Shamor is the Shin, the first stanza is Shamor, Lecha Dodi is not the next one. Likrat Shabbat Lechu V'Nelcha, there's a Lamed, and Shlomo's spelled out in Halevi. Okay, so he left a very clear reminder that he composed it. And that is a very popular hymn. And it is said to be in part a reflection of the practice of some mystics of going out of the city of Tzfat, going out to the fields to welcome the Sabbath and to usher the Sabbath queen in. That's why, according to some, at the very end, the last stanza of Lecha Dodi, we turn around and face to the west, because that's where the Sabbath queen, as it were, would be coming in. All right. And again, so we welcome the Sabbath queen. So that was added to the service. There are a couple other extra lines that are added here and there to mark the special quality of being Shabbat. And then one goes home. Right? Now, again, in the more traditional circles, not too many women go to the synagogue on Friday night because they're either busy getting all the final details for Shabbat or tired before then, or what have you. Today, it depends. Some women go to the synagogue at the early that time of Shabbat services. Some do not. It depends on your household. So now, the Talmud says that when the man would come home from the synagogue service on Friday night, Shabbat service, he would be accompanied by 2 angels. And when he came to the house, and if he saw everything was all in order and everything was hunky-dory, that's what it says in Talmud, hunky-dory, then one angel would say, may it be like this from this Shabbat to the next. And the other angel would say, Amen. However, which is almost always the case in my house when my kids were little, if things are still disrupted and everything's not in place the way it should be, the other angel says, may it be like this from this Shabbat to the next. And the other angel has to say amen to that. That's like a good angel, bad angel kind of thing. So the hymn, Shalom Aleichem, Malchei Sharet, Malchei Ayon, it was says to welcome these angels that come into the house. And then there is a tradition to bless the children. At that time, I do it after Kiddush for various reasons. And that consists of Yisimcha Elohim K'Ephraim Chim Menashe, may God make you like Ephraim and Menashe for boys. Yisimech Elohim Gesar Rivka Rachel Leah, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah for girls. And then both boys and girls are blessed with what we call the priestly blessings. Yevarecha Hashem Yishmerecha, may the Lord bless you and guard you. Ya'er Adonai Panav Elecha Yichuneka, may God cause his face to shine upon you. Be gracious unto you, Yisan, may God show favor to you and grant you peace. Okay, so that is then followed by Kiddush. Okay, we recite the Kiddush over wine or grape juice, if that's what you prefer. And then we are going to have the Hamotzi. The Shabbat table is supposed to be set with 2 loaves of bread. 2 uncut loaves of bread. The idea behind it is it says that in the wandering in the wilderness, what did Israel eat? There were no kosher McDonald's on the way. Burger King, I think, had 1 or 2, but anyway, so we were told that they brought manna, some kind of food came down from heaven. And they were supposed to gather only enough for each day's meal. If they gathered too much, it would be manna. Right? Before we get to the bread, we've said Kiddush. Now, Kiddush does not absolutely have to be said over wine. If you don't have any wine, if for whatever reason you didn't find wine or grape juice, you forgot or it got spoiled and went bad, it soured on you. If need be, you could make Kiddush over the bread. So according to one nice explanation, we cover the bread when we make Kiddush, so the bread will not see us making Kiddush over the wine and be embarrassed that we chose the wine over the bread. Yes, yes. Again, if you went to where, the man does everything. Some households, the man will do Kiddush and the wife will do Hamotzi. Some households, they go back and forth. And to give you another example, I'm a celiac, so I can't eat wheat bread. So I have special challahs made out of oats that I can eat. So I don't make hamotzi for my wife and daughter. Because of that, I just more comfortable that they should make their own hamotzi for their bread. So my wife or daughter makes the hamotzi for the 2 of them. Okay. So anyway, so that's one thing. But another explanation is you have the white tablecloth, you have the bread, you have cloth on top of it. That's like the manna. You had dew that landed on the ground, and then came the manna that landed on that, and then more dew on top of the manna. You take whichever explanation you like. I like the first one because it says to us, if we can think of being sensitive to inanimate objects that obviously cannot have their feelings hurt, maybe we'll learn to be sensitive to people. Okay, I think that's a wonderful lesson to take from it. Okay? So that's why I like it. Is it the real reason? I don't, some of the things we don't know the real reasons for any. Okay, now another aspect of it, by tradition, when we eat bread, we always wash our hands before eating the bread as a ritual cleansing. It's related to ritual impurity. It's related to the priests who ate their truma, the special offerings that they had to eat in the state of ritual purity. So whenever we eat bread, before we eat the bread, we're supposed to wash our hands, take a cup of water, pour twice over our right hand, then twice over our left hand. And just as we're about to dry our hands, because again, we really should say the blessing before the act. But since our hands theoretically are not ritually pure, it doesn't sound right to say the blessing when they're not pure. So you wait till they're pure. So before we dry our hands, which is part of the action of the purification of the hands, we say the blessing then as before or as we're drying our hands. Now, lesson for those who have young kids at home, you're not supposed to speak between washing your hands and eating the bread. So have your kids go first, and you get them to shut up for a little while. Maybe, depends on how old they are. Okay, but whatever. Okay, and then we go in and say the hamotzi. We have the 2 loaves of bread. This is the standard, 2 loaves of bread. Ashkenazim make a little nick in 1 loaf of bread, so you know where you're going to cut, so you shouldn't delay between the blessing and the cutting. And we put the bread that we're going to eat on the bottom, take the 2 of them. We say the hamotzi, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, praising God who brought forth bread for the earth. Okay. Then we cut the bottom bread, finish the cutting, and put some salt on it or dip it in salt. Salt was always brought with sacrifices in the ancient temple, and salt was very important in the ancient world. And we don't think much about salt, right? But it was so important in our diets. We have so much salt, sometimes we have to eliminate it from our diets. Where the ancestors did not have salt always. The word for salary from Latin is salt. Okay. So salt was very important. So tradition is to put salt. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, we used honey instead. Okay. And then you eat. There are songs that may or may not be sung as part of the ritual of the meal. They've been, many homes besides saying the Shalom Aleichem also recite chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs, Eshet Chayu Miyimsa, a woman of valor who can find her worth as far above rubies. Before we do Kiddush, the popular explanation is it's praise for the woman of the household. The more historical explanation is probably it's a mystical idea for the Sabbath, but I like the other one. Okay. And so again, with the idea of trying to make things more egalitarian, there are some booklets will have something for the wife to say for the husband. But if you go the mystical version of it, then you don't have to worry about it, what case may be. And then these different songs, these zmirot that are recited during the meal, towards the end of the meal, Eshet Chaim Yimsar Michra Batach Balev Bala Shalom Lo Yachzar. Again, an alphabetical crossing makes it easier. By the way, if you read through that, if you have a chance, read through it, you see what a woman did. If you took
That was an allusion to the people of Israel.
there's no that's Shir Shirim. rabbinic tradition, there's the whole book of Israel. Eshet Chayil, if I recall correctly, is usually understood as a mystical praise. Then again, I like the women of the house too, but on the other hand, look to, what's fascinating about it is you read through it and you see how busy a woman could be in that era. She cooks, she bakes, she weaves, she makes wool, she goes out in the market and buys things. She gets up early and makes sure the bread is baked early in the morning for her household. Yeah, more modern way. Yeah. The bread machines are very helpful. Okay. There are nice recipes for the bread machines. You can do it that way, or my wife does the initial kneading in the bread machine, and then she takes it out and she braids her challahs. That makes it easier for her. My mix she has to do by hand. I'm a lot of trouble. Can't even find a decent beer that's gluten-free. All right. And so Friday night is a night of leisure, of time together. Again, ideally at all the meals, the idea that you talk Torah, you talk about the Torah portion, you talk about important things in your lives. You try to ignore the weekday activities, the weekday business, the weekday news, which is hard, I know. Okay. Shabbat day is filled. Shabbat services, it's it's not as long as Rosh Hashanah, but you're aware of it, that we have the extra Psalms that are recited. The Torah portion is read each Shabbat. That takes up a good hefty portion of the Shabbat morning service. The rabbis, depending upon how much they talk, take up another portion of the service. There was the guy who said he used to time the rabbi with his watch when he gave his sermon. But later on, he decided better to use a calendar instead. But go home, Shabbat lunch is similar to the Friday night, the same kind of order of things. Only the Kiddush is a little bit different, usually is a little shorter Kiddush. But again, you have the hamotzi, 2 loaves of bread. You don't have the shalom aleichem, you don't have the eshet chayil. You may have Shabbat hymns, the zmirot. The afternoon depends upon your way of doing things to relax. Some synagogues may even have classes on Shabbat afternoon. That's very popular in Orthodox circles, that people go to the synagogue for different kinds of lectures and things. Big in Israel like that. Most conservative synagogues don't have too much of that. Mincha is a little bit longer than a normal weekday mincha because we have a Torah reading. We read, normally the first aliyah for next Shabbat is read Shabbat afternoon. It's usually at least 11 verses, divided up in 3 aliyot, and then the same verses are read Monday and Thursday mornings. There's a tradition, the Talmud speaks of having 3 Sabbath meals, shalosh seudot. In Yiddish, it becomes shalosh shudas, or shalosh sudas, the kind of corruption of it. Shalosh seudot, you have Friday night dinner, Shabbat lunch. There was no breakfast in that schedule of things. And then between Mincha and Mariv was the Sudah Shlishit. A lot of synagogues will have something at the synagogue, especially during the winter months. It may be very small. I'm sure they have something here after the Mincha service. You go to another room and you get some herring and or maybe gefilte fish or chopped eggs or whatnot. What? Oh, maybe, l'chaim. There's nothing wrong with l'chaim. All right. And then once it's time to make the evening service, The evening service is just like the weekday, only usually on a Saturday night, there's some extra passages that are added. And then the Havdalah. The Havdalah is a very beautiful ceremony. It's on Motzei Shabbat, at the end of Shabbat. We take a glass of wine. We have normally a candle that has at least 2 wicks, braided candle, and some kind of spices, besamim. And have an introductory paragraph. And first we say Borei Pri Hagafen over the wine. And then we say Borei Minei Besamim, blessing over the spices, and everybody takes a whiff of the spices. Why do we do that? One explanation is that there's a idea found in rabbinic literature that on Shabbat, everyone has what they call a neshama yetera. An extra soul enters into our body for Shabbat, giving us a special feelings for that Shabbat. And on Saturday night, when the Shabbat is over, that neshama, that extra spiritual quality, departs from our body. And what happens? You feel a little faint. If you feel a little faint, what do? Some smelling salts. So we take we smell the besamim to have the sweet aroma of the besamim as the neshama yetera leaves. And then finally, we have the candle. We say the blessing over the light, marking the end of Shabbat, because we don't have fire on Shabbat. And according to the Talmud, fire was actually created or first introduced after Shabbat. That Adam Harishon had never seen and never had fire. He never, so he was taught about fire after Shabbat was over. How I don't really understand that myself, how that came out. But similarly, when a Yom Tov ends, we don't have the fire or the spices, but we just have what we call the Havdalah, Bari Pergafen, and the blessing of Havdalah. Mavdil ben kol shachol ben or lachoshen, who separates between the holy and the profane, light and dark, etc. That's why it's called Havdalah, the word Havdil, to distinguish between. Okay. And then there are even some circles, they like to have something a little extra for Saturday night. They have what we call a Malava Malka, that you escort the Shabbos queen as she's leaving town. I don't see that really very much in any conservative circles of observance of the Malava Malka. Okay. And again, ideally, you're not supposed to be rushing to get out of Shabbat, right? But people have what they have to do. Okay, so that's how the Shabbat goes. We talked a little bit about, ideally you can make it to the synagogue to make that part of your schedule, your day. Starting next week, I'm going to pass a paper around asking you what synagogue you attended for Shabbat services. As a kind of a reminder to you and to your sponsoring rabbis, you make sure you talk to them what their feelings are, where and where you can go in terms of that. Okay. Any questions? Nope. You know how to observe Shabbat completely now?
And I'll be teaching Hebrew. Yeah.
And you'll be teaching Hebrew. Okay. All right. Gotcha, Alex. Alex is volunteering to teach everybody Hebrew, and you will teach him all the extra laws of Shabbat, all 39 malachot and all of their subcategories that are toldot, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need to remember the 39. That was there for you just to get a various feel, understanding of it. Did I send them out to you? No. Okay. I will send them out to you. Again, I'm not expecting you to remember all 39 malachot. All right. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's another early. We'll see everybody, God willing, next week. All right. If you're voting, don't forget to vote. If you're not voting, don't vote, I guess.
Vote early, vote
I'm a
often.
Canadian citizen, so I don't get.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I vote here. I send in my absentee ballot to Michigan.
Uh-huh.
I am all taken care of.
Well, a lot of the voting in Australia is